Adolf Hitler was extremely detailed in the visual and ideological construction of the National Socialist regime. Under his leadership, the swastika was adopted as the movement's central symbol, not only for its visual impact, but also for its connection to ancient traditions he sought to reinterpret. He instituted the outstretched arm salute as the official form of state greeting, promoting discipline and public cohesion. Furthermore, he established a precise iconography that included uniforms, emblems, banners, and gestures, all aimed at reinforcing the identity of the new order. Despite their central role in the propaganda system of the time, many of these creations are now banned in several European countries. Germany, Austria, France, and Poland impose sanctions ranging from fines to several years in prison for their display, while in the United States their use is legally protected, although socially frowned upon. What were those creations designed by Nazism that are now banned by law? The Nazi swastika. The National Socialist Party used the swastika as its central visual symbol from its earliest days in Munich. The symbol appeared in its meetings, on its flags, armbands, and documents as a fundamental part of its identity. This black figure, rotated at a right angle, on a white background and a red circle, became its signature. Hitler himself selected the colors and shape, intending to give the party its own style. Over time, every official institution of the regime used the swastika as a mandatory symbol of affiliation. Schools, barracks, courts, and public offices hung it in entrances, classrooms, and on desks. Reich laws dictated that it was the emblem of the German state and must be respected as such. During the years of the Third Reich, not displaying it at events or functions could be seen as an act of rebellion. Youth groups, military units, and civil associations wore the symbol on their uniforms and banners. The cult of the swastika grew as part of the regime's effort at ideological unification. In school books, children colored party flags as part of their regular homework. Propaganda films depicted them fluttering in the wind at every organized rally or parade. When the war ended, the Allied countries banned the symbol's use in occupied territory. Modern German law establishes that the swastika is prohibited as a representation of extremist ideologies. Its display is punishable by fines or imprisonment, except in contexts of research, art, or historical remembrance. Austria, France, Poland, Hungary, and other countries also restrict it by law in their penal codes. The ban covers T-shirts, flags, pins, drawings, and even online publications. Digital platforms have deleted content that displays the symbol outside of an educational setting. In Germany, police have closed stores and online forums for selling items bearing the image. Even visible tattoos of the symbol have led to sanctions in public or sports venues. In some trials, the mere display of the symbol was used as evidence of advocacy of National Socialism. Neo-Nazi organizations that used it at rallies or on leaflets have been dissolved by court order. Today, the design is studied as an example of symbolic appropriation by totalitarian regimes. Museums and documentaries explain its history to prevent its trivialization or provocative use. The swastika, which had ancient origins in other cultures, was forever marked as an image of Nazism. The regime's attempt to give it a new meaning transformed it into a global symbol of hatred and persecution, the Nazi salute. The National Socialist regime imposed the raised arm salute as a mandatory gesture of loyalty. From the early years of the party, this gesture became a form of public submission to Hitler. Every time his name was mentioned, those present were required to extend their right arm with their hand open. At meetings, schools, factories, or sporting events, the same posture was repeated as a general rule. Failure to do so could be considered disrespectful to the Führer or even a sign of rejection of the regime. State laws established the salute as part of official protocol. In the army, its use replaced the traditional salute during ceremonies with Nazi symbols. Youth groups, civil servants, police officers, and even medical personnel used the gesture throughout their daily routines. Conduct manuals explained when and how it should be performed correctly. The salute was accompanied by the phrase "Heil Hitler," repeated several times a day in school and work settings. Even young children practiced it upon entering class or singing the party anthem. Nazi propaganda recorded and disseminated images of crowds raising their arms as authorities passed by. In parades, the gesture became a mass choreography demonstrating order and obedience. Official films depicted the salute as a symbol of national unity. Even letter greetings ended with expressions like Mit Deutschem Gruß or Heil Hitler out of bureaucratic obligation. When the war ended, the countries that occupied Germany banned the use of the Nazi salute. New criminal laws classified it as a manifestation of extremist ideologies. Germany punishes its use with financial penalties and prison sentences, except in educational or documentary cases. Austria and other Central European countries also criminalize the public display of the gesture. In everyday life, raising the arm in this manner can lead to arrest or legal investigation. Some trials have included videos or photos of the salute as evidence of prohibited propaganda. At soccer matches or demonstrations, people have been arrested for using it in public. Today, the gesture is directly associated with the Nazi dictatorship and its crimes. Its use is no longer linked to respect or tradition, but to the exaltation of a criminal regime. Digital platforms block content that displays it without academic justification. Schools and museums treat it as part of the symbolic machinery of totalitarian control. What was once a daily routine imposed by fear or custom now represents one of the most monitored and penalized gestures of the recent past: the SS runes. The Nazi regime adopted ancient Germanic runic symbols and used them as official symbols. The Schutzstaffel, known as the SS, adopted two lightning bolt-shaped S as its primary emblem. These figures, called Sig runes, were taken from the runic alphabet and adapted to the organization's design. They appeared on flags, uniforms, rings, and internal documents. The double lightning bolt was on officers' caps and on the fronts of barracks. SS leader Heinrich Himmler ordered the use of ancient symbols to convey an appearance of tradition and power. Other runic symbols were also used within the group, such as the Tiwaz rune on decorations or the Odal rune on cemeteries. These emblems spread among members as part of an esoteric aesthetic that blended nationalism, paganism, and lineage worship. Internal manuals explained their origin, form, and application in core rituals. The use of these runes was not decorative. They represented total obedience, blood as the supreme value, and duty above life. Himmler believed that the ancient symbols gave spiritual strength to his organization. The SS functioned as a closed order with its own symbols, oaths, and practices. The runes also appeared on commemorative plaques, sculptures, and architectural pieces built by the regime. In the concentration camps, officers wore the runic insignia embroidered or engraved on their clothing. After the war, the Allied powers declared the SAS a criminal group. German law prohibited any symbol related to that unit. The use of Sig runes and other Nazi-approved runes was prohibited by law. Displaying them in public, on clothing or on posters, can lead to criminal convictions. Neo-Nazi groups have used slightly modified versions to evade punishment. However, the courts have ruled that any design evoking SS symbolism is prohibited. Today, tattoos with these shapes have been grounds for expulsion from police forces and the military. In some European countries, their presence is enough to open investigations for Nazi apology. At sporting events or demonstrations, police can intervene if they detect such symbols. Online stores have been shut down for selling products with Sig runes or disguised versions. Digital platforms block accounts that promote or display these emblems. Museums and educational projects explain how Nazi aesthetics used pagan references to construct their discourse. SS runes are no longer viewed as historical remnants but as active signs of ideological hatred. The law considers them direct marks of the criminal apparatus that carried out murders, deportations, and persecutions during the Third Reich. What began as a symbolic appropriation ended up as one of the most closely monitored items by authorities throughout Europe. The Horst Wessel Lied. The Nazi regime adopted the Horst Wessel Lied as its official song from the early years of the party. The lyrics were written by Horst Wessel, a member of the SA, shortly before he died in a street confrontation. He was martyred by the propaganda apparatus, and the song that bore his name became a symbol of struggle. Goebbels promoted its widespread use as an anthem at political rallies and party ceremonies. The melody accompanied marches, parades, and public events where officials of the Third Reich appeared. In schools, children learned it as part of their mandatory patriotic repertoire. State radio stations broadcast it daily along with the national anthem. Whenever it was sung in public, it had to be done with an outstretched arm salute. Speaking, moving, or interrupting while it was playing was prohibited out of respect for the party's message. Party rallies closed with the Horst Wessel Lied as a way of reaffirming ideological unity. Troops sang it before missions or at funerals. The lyrics made direct reference to internal enemies, street fighting, and personal sacrifice. The words were repeated with an emphasis on loyalty and combat against forces considered traitors by the regime. After the fall of the Third Reich, the chant was banned by the occupation authorities. Current German law makes its performance a criminal offense if used to spread National Socialist ideas. Singing it in public, recording it, or distributing it is restricted except in contexts of historical analysis. In recent trials, individuals have been convicted for playing excerpts at extremist demonstrations. Digital platforms block content where it appears for purposes other than documentary or educational. At sporting events, festivals, or protests, its singing has led to expulsions or arrests. In Austria, Switzerland, and other European countries, its dissemination is similarly regulated. Modified versions can also be sanctioned if the content continues to appeal to the original ideology. Neo-Nazi groups have attempted to revive it as a rallying cry, prompting judicial interventions. Law enforcement can stop its playing even without a prior warrant if it is interpreted as glorifying Nazism. Today, the Horst Wessel Lied is one of the clearest examples of how music was used as a tool of indoctrination. Its symbolic meaning remains as a direct representation of the Nazi propaganda apparatus. The song, which once resonated on every corner of the Reich, is now monitored as part of the ideological control mechanisms of the past. Its prohibition is not only legal but also part of the memory of a regime that used music as a political weapon. The SS. The SS began as a small group charged with escorting Hitler. By 1925, it had only a small number of members. Heinrich Himmler assumed leadership in 1929 and transformed the unit into an autonomous structure with complete control. Its main objective was to ensure party dominance and execute its plans of repression. It was divided into three branches. The Allgemeine SS handled political and administrative functions. The Waffen-SS acted as a parallel military force, and the Totenkopfverbände managed the detention and extermination centers. Candidates were selected based on racial criteria and their unconditional loyalty to the party. Himmler demanded physical evidence, genealogical analysis, and personal oaths addressed to Hitler. The group operated outside the ordinary justice system. Its hierarchical structure answered only to its senior commanders with no external intervention. During the war, it was deployed on multiple fronts. In occupied areas such as France, Poland, Ukraine, and Yugoslavia, the Waffen-SS carried out mass executions of civilians. Its units not only fought, they also carried out planned elimination operations. The SS directed the central apparatus of the Holocaust. From rail transport to the operation of gas chambers, every aspect of the process was organized under its control. They had operational control over facilities such as Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, and Majdanek. In addition, they controlled the Ahnenerbe, an entity that conducted ideological research with an academic appearance. Its activities included racial projects, archaeological missions, and experiments on prisoners. This section fueled the pseudoscientific justification of the Nazi extermination program. After the collapse of the regime, numerous commanders were arrested. Many appeared at the Nuremberg trials for crimes against humanity, acts of genocide, and violations of international law. The SS was declared a criminal organization. Its emblems, slogans, and artwork are legally prohibited in Germany. Thousands of members managed to escape. Some resorted to clandestine routes like the ODESSA network. Others relied on support from foreign organizations or adopted false identities to avoid prosecution. Many remained hidden for years without facing legal charges. The documentation of their operations is still being analyzed. The records reveal a planned system, documented in detail, that articulated decisions, assassinations, and mechanisms of repression in a bureaucratic sequence. Every action was recorded and monitored. Today, the SS represents the most extreme paradigm of total subordination to political power. Its symbolic remnants are banned from all public spaces. Its acronyms, visual material, and references are illegal, even on digital platforms or in entertainment products. The Hitler Youth as an organization. The group was created as a key part of the Nazi system. It was not just a parallel political school, but a mandatory means of shaping all minors in the Reich. Central Command established the curriculum, goals, and ideological control from Berlin. It was divided by age and gender. Children between the ages of 10 and 14 belonged to the Jungvolk. From there, they joined the Hitler Youth until they reached 18. Girls were part of the League of German Girls. Each group had distinct rules, ranks, and tasks, always under a vertical hierarchy. The instructors were older youths trained in special camps. They received political, physical, and military training. They were in charge of implementing the exercises, teaching doctrine, and outdoor drills. Everything revolved around obedience, sacrifice, and loyalty to the head of state. The teaching content combined national history, songs, parades, hand-to-hand combat, and racial propaganda. From a young age, children repeated slogans about race, the destiny of the people, and the internal enemy. Sundays featured marches. Afternoons were given for combat training, speech readings, and resistance training. Parents were required to enroll their children. Refusal could result in legal sanctions or job loss. Schools operated in parallel, but lesson plans were influenced by the same ideological apparatus. Over time, the program became stricter. By 1939, attendance was practically compulsory. Young people were given wooden weapons for training. They were taught to recognize tanks and airplanes and how to form squads. National holidays featured parades by the organization. In many cities, the Hitler Youth occupied entire squares with drums, flags, and uniforms. The image was that of a disciplined, strong mass subservient to the collective ideal. After turning 18, many were sent directly to the front or to the SS. The organization functioned as a training ground for soldiers, state employees, and party members. The indoctrination didn't end upon leaving school. It carried over into the adult world. After 1945, the Hitler Youth was dissolved by the occupying powers. Its structure was dismantled. Books, insignia, and manuals were banned. Former instructors were investigated. Today, forming a similar organization in Germany is punishable by law. Using its symbols or emulating its methods in public can be considered apology for the regime. Current legislation prohibits all expressions associated with the organization, whether visual or verbal, in public spaces, on social media, or at political events. The Hitler Youth uniform. The Nazi regime turned clothing into a tool for ideological formation. Young members of the Hitler Youth wore a uniform model consisting of a beige shirt, dark shorts, a crossed belt, a knotted black scarf, and a swastika armband. This attire was used at events, training sessions, and school assignments as part of a system that reinforced visual discipline and collective belonging. Each piece of the uniform followed detailed instructions. Manuals indicated the correct way to wear it: buttoned collar, aligned armband, clean boots, and supervised posture. Appearance inspection was the responsibility of adult supervisors or internal group leaders. The attire did not merely differentiate hierarchies, but also marked each minor as an active member of the party system. Official images showed members wearing this attire during outdoor exercises or patriotic tasks. Propaganda exalted the orderly presentation of youth bodies as a reflection of national unity. The insignia were presented in formal ceremonies, reinforcing the bond between family, youth, and the party. In the final months of the conflict, many adolescents sent to the front still wore the uniform of their initial training. Some were arrested wearing this clothing without having received formal military training. This attire became associated with ideological imposition and the use of minors for state purposes. After the German surrender, the occupation authorities ordered the removal of all symbols linked to the party. Current German law prohibits the public display of this uniform due to its representative nature of national-socialist indoctrination. Its use outside of educational contexts can constitute a crime for ideological incitement. Original pieces kept in archives or museums require documentary proof. Currently, the uniform is considered an object of priority surveillance. Some commercial platforms have been penalized for distributing replicas without legal authorization. Similar versions used at private events have led to police interventions. This garment, once part of the everyday life of millions of minors, is now analyzed as a key tool in the symbolic control of the Third Reich. The Gestapo. The Gestapo began life as a state control office. It was created in 1933 in Prussia under the direction of Hermann Göring. Shortly after, Heinrich Himmler took command and merged it with the other security agencies. From the beginning, its function was clear: to locate, monitor, and eliminate any threat to the regime. Its target was not only political opponents, it also pursued Jews, communists, religious critics, Roma, homosexuals, and anyone who broke the rules of the state. No warrant was needed for arrests. Agents acted without legal restriction. Anyone could be detained, interrogated, or sent to a concentration camp without going through a regular court. The Gestapo worked with a vast network of civilian informants. Neighbors, co-workers, or even family members could inform on others. No solid evidence was required. An accusation was enough to activate the repressive apparatus. The organization operated from local headquarters in each region. There, suspects were interrogated, tortured, and filed. The files were filled with details of daily life, personal beliefs, and social relationships. It was directly linked to the extermination apparatus. It participated in the deportations of Jews, organized mass roundups, and assisted in the surveillance of the camps. It also compiled lists of people for preventive arrest. During the war, it expanded its power in the occupied territories. In France, the Netherlands, Poland, and Norway, the Gestapo acted as the highest security authority. It directed executions, selected hostages, and supervised the regime's special prisons. After 1945, its files were used in the Nuremberg trials. The evidence collected showed how each office operated, what techniques it used, and how many cases it handled. Many of its former leaders were captured and tried for war crimes. Others managed to escape using false names or with the support of clandestine networks. Some returned to public office during the post-war period. Today, the Gestapo is officially considered a criminal organization. In Germany, making positive reference to her, reproducing her symbols, or promoting her image is prohibited by law. Surviving documents are kept as historical evidence. They may not be used for political purposes or displayed without an educational context. Their existence serves as proof of the regime's totalitarian reach. The Ahnenerbe. The Ahnenerbe was an organization founded by Heinrich Himmler in 1935. Its objective was to collect evidence to support ideas about ancient Germanic superiority. It presented itself as an institute dedicated to archaeological, historical, and anthropological studies, but it acted as a cover to justify the ideology of the Nazi regime. This organization sent teams to various parts of the world. They visited Tibet, Iceland, France, even Syria. Himmler wanted to prove that the Germanic peoples had been the founders of the great civilizations. His researchers tried to find traces of an original Aryan race in monuments, symbols, and ancient remains. The Ahnenerbe was composed of dozens of departments. Some focused on analyzing skulls and body measurements. Others were dedicated to examining runes or Norse mythology. In many cases, the methods did not follow any scientific standards. They were guided by mystical beliefs, forced interpretations, or unproven theories. Among their activities, they also organized talks and exhibitions throughout Germany. They wanted people to believe that the Germanic people had glorious roots. They used these findings as propaganda to reinforce national pride and legitimize territorial expansion. One of the most controversial cases was the project that sought to prove that Germans were directly descended from the Atlanteans. To this end, Ahnenerbe teams traveled to remote locations to search for ruins or cultural remains that fit that idea. It didn't matter if the results were false or forced, as long as they served the party's narrative. The Ahnenerbe also collaborated with medical experiments conducted in concentration camps. Several of its members were present at trials on prisoners, measuring their reactions to cold or pain with no therapeutic intent. Several of these researchers were tried after the end of the conflict. At the end of the war, the Ahnenerbe was singled out as an institution that blended pseudoscience with the repressive apparatus. More than 100 people were identified as having worked directly with the organization. Many of them were arrested, but others managed to go into hiding or reintegrate into academic institutions without consequences. Documentation discovered after the fall of the Third Reich revealed reports, photos, and records of their missions. These archives showed that many of their conclusions had been fabricated or manipulated. It was proven that the supposed scientific basis they offered was in fact ideological support. Although the Ahnenerbe was officially dissolved in 1945, its legacy contaminated sectors of history, archaeology, and anthropology for years. Some of its publications continued to circulate in certain circles seeking to justify racist narratives under the guise of academic study. The name Ahnenerbe means inheritance of the ancestors. That idea encapsulates its mission, to find in the distant past an excuse for the political decisions of the present. It was not a scientific institution, but a tool of the Nazi Party to dress up ideas of supremacy in academic garb. Mein Kampf. The book Mein Kampf, written by Adolf Hitler in 1924, became the ideological basis of National Socialism. He wrote it while imprisoned in Landsberg prison, after his failed coup attempt in Munich. The work combined autobiographical elements with political approaches. In its pages, Hitler explained his worldview, his contempt for Marxism, his hatred of Jews, and his plan to transform Germany. He also detailed his strategy for coming to power through legal means. The text defended the idea of a constant struggle between races. He believed that history was marked by the conflict between superior peoples and those considered inferior. According to him, the Aryan race was the most valuable and must be kept pure to ensure the country's future. In its chapters, Hitler also spoke of the need to secure living space for Germans. He used the term Lebensraum to justify eastward expansion. He pointed out that Germany must conquer territories in Eastern Europe in order to grow. The book accused Jews of being responsible for Germany's decline. It blamed them for the defeat in World War I, the economic collapse, and political corruption. This rhetoric was key in the creation of discriminatory laws and the preparations for extermination. Mein Kampf was first published in 1925. At first, it had little impact, but after Hitler came to power in 1933, it became required reading. It was distributed in schools, public offices, and barracks. It was even given to couples upon their wedding. During the Nazi regime, more than 12 million copies were printed. The book became a tool of indoctrination. Its phrases were repeated in speeches, on murals, and in educational programs. Although many did not read it in its entirety, its message became commonplace. After the fall of the Third Reich, the Allied authorities banned its distribution. In Germany, its publication was banned for decades. Its publication with critical notes was only permitted in 2016 to prevent the text from being used as propaganda. The book was used as evidence at the Nuremberg trials. It was presented as proof that Hitler had already outlined his plans years before carrying them out. The accusations showed that the ideas written in Mein Kampf were not just opinions, but a project that was carried out step by step. Today, the content of Mein Kampf is banned in many countries. Its free reading remains a subject of debate. Some argue that it should be kept out of public reach, while others believe it can be used to study how totalitarian ideologies are constructed. The book's history shows how a text filled with hatred was transformed into a tool of destruction. From its writing in a prison cell to its mass distribution in schools and offices throughout the Third Reich, Mein Kampf was more than a book. It was a political weapon. The Volksempfänger, the Nazi People's Radio. In 1933, shortly after Hitler took power, Joseph Goebbels announced that the new regime should reach every German home through a simple and accessible device, the People's Receiver. The project was entrusted to Otto Griesing, an engineer at the Telefunken firm, with a direct order to manufacture a device that would be easy to produce, inexpensive, and designed exclusively for receiving German stations. The resulting model, the VE301, was presented that same year at the Berlin Broadcasting Exhibition. It had a bakelite casing, a tuning knob, and a speaker. It included no volume control or power button. The device began to play as soon as it was plugged in. Its antenna was very weak, making it difficult to hear foreign stations clearly. The price was also tight. The VE301 cost 35 marks, half of what other devices cost. Even so, many families couldn't afford to pay that sum in one lump sum, so financing plans with weekly payments were created. Goebbels launched propaganda campaigns to encourage people to buy them. The state installed collective receivers in factories, offices, schools, and even farmland. It was common for the Führer's speeches to be made compulsory, and if someone turned off the device during an important broadcast, they could be prosecuted. The technical design also had a political purpose. Unlike other receivers, the Volksempfänger couldn't easily tune into shortwave or powerful foreign signals. This limited access to international information and strengthened the regime's control over what people heard. The device thus became a tool of passive surveillance. By 1940, almost 70% of German households had one. Several models were manufactured, such as the VE301, the VE401, and even a portable version for soldiers at the front. The factories that produced them adapted to the war effort and continued operating until the final years of the conflict. After Germany's defeat, the Allied forces requisitioned or destroyed thousands of these receivers. Many were dismantled or converted to receive free radio stations. However, some models survived and are now in museums or private collections as symbols of the Third Reich's propaganda control. The Reich's anti-Semitic press. Within the propaganda framework of the Third Reich, the press was a carefully crafted tool for amplifying the regime's anti-Semitic ideology. From the early years of the Nazi rise, every printed word was controlled, ensuring that all media contributed to fueling the discourse of the internal enemy. The primary target, the Jewish community. One of the most aggressive instruments was the weekly Der Stürmer, edited by Julius Streicher. This outlet followed no journalistic codes and maintained no appearance of neutrality. Its language was crude, graphic, and explicitly inflammatory. It featured grotesque caricatures, fabricated stories, and unsubstantiated accusations, all with the aim of dehumanizing Jews and presenting them as a constant threat. But Der Stürmer did not act alone. The rest of the press, under the control of the propaganda ministry led by Joseph Goebbels, replicated the narratives necessary to sustain the official narrative. Editors were instructed on how to frame headlines, what words to use, whom to interview, and what events to highlight. The press became the mouthpiece of the party, not an observer of reality. Articles promoted conspiracy theories about alleged plans for world domination, linked common crimes to Jewish individuals without evidence, and gave space to pseudoscientific arguments to justify segregation. This systematic manipulation did not seek to inform, but rather to transform collective perception. Distribution was massive. Public display cases with copies accessible to all were placed in schools, squares, and government offices. Reading these contents was encouraged as a patriotic duty. Those who expressed skepticism were branded as accomplices of the enemy. After the fall of the regime, evidence of the use of the press as a weapon was documented in multiple trials. Julius Streicher was prosecuted at Nuremberg for crimes against humanity due to his editorial work, not for military actions. His conviction set a precedent for the impact of words turned into doctrine. Today, copies of these media outlets are part of court archives, memorial museums, and research centers, not as pieces of publishing history, but as a testament to how far the written word can go when it is driven by hatred and turned into state policy. Goebbels' propaganda films. The Third Reich's cinematic system was conceived with a purpose greater than simple entertainment. Under the direct command of Joseph Goebbels, cinema became a strategic tool of the regime to shape public perception, strengthen National Socialist ideology, and consolidate a centrally imposed narrative through images. Goebbels, head of the Ministry of Propaganda, clearly understood the power of visual language. He recognized that an image, a melody, or a phrase could surpass the impact of any written speech. For this reason, he personally reviewed every script, every edit, and every message projected on screen. His office not only approved films, but also intervened in documentaries, newsreels, and school short films. Among the most iconic productions is Triumph of the Will, directed by Leni Riefenstahl. This production, constructed with precise framing and theatrical scenery, did not reproduce facts, but rather a choreography of political dominance. The Nuremberg Party Congress appeared as a ritualized event designed to exalt Hitler as a transcendent figure. Every detail was coordinated: the cameras, the marches, the lighting, the sound. Other productions used a more direct approach, such as The Eternal Jew, which included selected images to generate contempt for the Jewish community, reinforcing stereotypes and presenting them as an internal threat. The editing was designed to provoke emotions without explanatory intent. It functioned not as a reportage, but as an ideological programming tool. Each segment of the audience received content tailored to their social role. For youth, stories celebrating dedication and discipline. For women, tales exalting the model of the national mother for combatants, plots of honor, loyalty, and victory. The message was tailored to the assigned role within the structure of the regime. These productions were shown in movie theaters, schools, factories, and at party meetings. Attendance was part of standard behavior. Before each commercial screening, newsreels included reports from the front, always tailored to reinforce an image of dominance, even in times of retreat. After the conflict ended, many of these materials were banned for their propagandistic content. They were archived as documentary evidence. Some of the filmmakers faced legal proceedings. Goebbels avoided appearing before any court. He died with his family during the final days of the regime. Even so, his actions clearly demonstrated how cinema can be molded to fulfill political functions, far removed from any artistic or narrative. Current use of Nazi symbols on the internet and in video games. In the digital environment, emblems linked to the Nazi regime persist in fragmented, hidden, or reinterpreted forms. Despite the legal restrictions in force in many countries, symbols associated with the Third Reich have not disappeared from the virtual world. They continue to circulate on forums, social networks, game servers, and shared files, moving in difficult-to-trace formats. On multiplayer platforms such as war video game mods or titles set in World War II, flags, uniforms, SS emblems, or phrases taken from Hitler's speeches appear. Their presence is often justified as part of a historical reenactment, but they are also used by groups seeking to revive this imagery for other purposes. Some avatars, usernames, or custom designs discreetly incorporate elements such as swastikas, runes, or Nazi salutes, camouflaged in visual codes recognizable only by certain niches. The dark web and closed communities function as spaces for preservation and dissemination. Documents, recordings, pamphlets, scanned books, and audiovisual material produced by the regime are stored there, unfiltered and uncontextualized. Some sites attempt to present it as a historical archive. Others openly glorify it. On social media, strategies are employed to circumvent moderation algorithms. Letters are replaced with symbols, images are inverted, or memes are used to make veiled references. Language is adapted to avoid censorship. Instead of full names, initials are used or coded. Languages shared among members of certain digital communities are used. Video games represent an ambiguous zone. In Germany, for years, the display of Nazi symbolism was prohibited, even in historical games. However, these regulations were relaxed, starting in 2018 based on educational and contextual criteria. Today, some productions can include elements of the Nazi regime if they are clearly framed within an anti-fascist narrative. But this permissiveness also opens the door to misuse. Scenes taken from games are reused online for purposes unrelated to history. Platforms like YouTube and TikTok also struggle to regulate the circulation of this content. Although they have strict policies, users employ editing and posting techniques that make detection difficult. Some excerpts from Goebbels' speeches or Nazi marches appear accompanied by ironic effects or modern music, making it difficult to classify them as direct propaganda. Legislation varies by jurisdiction. While the use and dissemination of Nazi symbols is strictly prohibited in Germany, Austria, and France, there are no specific regulations in other countries. This legal disparity allows files to be hosted on foreign servers and accessible from anywhere. Despite efforts to limit their spread, Nazi symbolism continues to adapt to digital channels. It no longer needs monuments or parades. A pseudonym, a shared file, or a modified game is enough for it to resurface. This persistence shows that the fight against these ideas is not limited to erasing emblems, but rather to understanding the spaces where they try to reappear. The Nuremberg Laws. In September 1935, during the annual National Socialist Party Congress in Nuremberg, the Nazi regime announced a set of regulations that legally reconfigured the racial structure of the German state. Known as the Nuremberg Laws, they established the legal basis for the systematic exclusion of Jews from citizenship and public life in the Reich. The first of these provisions was the so-called Law for the Protection of German Blood and Honor. It prohibited marriages and sexual relations between persons considered to be of German or related blood and those classified as Jewish. It also prohibited Jews from employing German workers under the age of 45 in their homes, citing a supposed need to preserve racial purity. The second fundamental law was the Reich citizenship law, which redefined legal membership in the nation. According to this legislation, only those with German or related blood could be considered full citizens. Jews, therefore, were relegated to the status of subjects of the state, without access to basic civil rights. Both laws were supplemented by a series of clarifying decrees issued in the following months. These texts specified how each individual was to be classified according to their ancestry. Based on the number of Jewish grandparents, a distinction was made between pure Jews, first-degree mixed race, or second-degree mixed race. This categorization made it possible to precisely define who should be discriminated against, excluded, or monitored. The implications were immediate. Thousands of people lost their jobs in the public administration, the education sector, and the healthcare system. Jewish doctors and lawyers were stripped of their licenses. Businesses were closed, contracts cancelled, and access to universities and public spaces was restricted. All of this was achieved not through direct violence, but through perfectly worded legal provisions. These laws did not emerge in a vacuum. They were the result of years of propaganda and systematic social exclusion. Furthermore, the regime presented them as a way to normalize the legal situation, thus legitimizing discrimination already underway. What had previously been street violence or social pressure now had the force of law. Internationally, the reaction was moderate. Some governments criticized the provisions, but there were no significant sanctions or diplomatic measures. For the Nazi leadership, this lukewarm response was a signal that they could move forward without major external consequences. Domestically, the laws marked a turning point. They legalized exclusion and offered the state a framework to pursue its racial program more systematically. These were not symbolic measures, but the legal basis for what would follow: mass dispossession, deportation, and extermination. Over time, the Nuremberg laws affected not only the Jews, they also served as a model for regulating the lives of other communities considered undesirable by the regime, including Roma, black, and disabled people. The logic of exclusion spread, always under legal cover. After 1945, Allied jurists used these regulations as central evidence at the Nuremberg trials. They were proof that the Nazi apparatus had not operated in chaos, but through laws, decrees, and regulations that transformed persecution into state policy. The barbarity, in this case, had been carried out with the seal of legality. The People's Court, Volksgerichtshof. In 1934, following the Reichstag fire and amid the consolidation of Nazi power, a new judicial body was established to try crimes considered treason against the state. Named the Volksgerichtshof, or People's Court, this special court became one of the regime's most feared instruments. It did not respond to common legal criteria, nor was it subject to the judicial standards of traditional German law. Its mission was political, to harshly punish any conduct perceived as a threat to National Socialism, even if it lacked criminal justice in the strict sense. The judicial process, as it had been known until then, ceased to have any weight within its walls. The court operated under the direction of judges loyal to the party. The most infamous of these was Roland Freisler, who presided over the court between 1942 and 1945. His style was strident, authoritarian, and theatrical. He insulted the accused, constantly interrupted them, and denied them any effective defense. The hearings were a predetermined farce. Sentences were not based on evidence, but on the ideological affiliation of the accused. The most common punishment was the death penalty, carried out swiftly after trials that lasted only minutes. In some cases, executions took place on the same day as the verdict. The Volksgerichtshof primarily dealt with cases of political dissent, sabotage, espionage, and treason. It also prosecuted members of resistance movements, such as those involved in the July 20th, 1944 assassination attempt on Hitler's life. In these trials, the accused were publicly humiliated before being sentenced. Many of them were executed at Plötzensee prison by hanging or guillotine. There was no possibility of appeal. The verdict of the People's Court was final and uncontested. The families of the condemned were notified by letter and, in many cases, were forced to cover the costs of the trial and execution. The operation of the tribunal was accompanied by a propaganda strategy. The trials were recorded or transcribed to be used as a warning. The message was clear: Any criticism, however slight, would be punished with the full weight of the Third Reich's judicial apparatus. As the war progressed and acts of internal resistance increased, the number of trials grew. Between 1934 and 1945, the People's Court sentenced more than 5,000 people to capital punishment, not counting thousands of prison sentences or forced labor. Judicial repression accelerated with the fall of the Eastern Front and the collapse of the regime. After the end of the war, the Allies regarded the Volksgerichtshof as one of the crudest expressions of Nazi totalitarianism. Roland Freisler died during an air raid in 1945 before facing charges. However, other judges on the tribunal were arrested and tried for crimes against humanity. Today, the People's Tribunal is remembered not as a judicial institution, but as a mechanism of persecution disguised as justice. Instead of applying the law, it used it as an instrument of repression. Its legacy left no legal precedents, only a historical warning about how the law can be distorted into a weapon of state terror. The enemy of the state doctrine. Within the legal thought of the Third Reich, one idea took shape and ultimately determined the entire repressive structure of the regime, the figure of the enemy of the state. This notion, promoted from the early years of National Socialist rule, completely redefined the role of the law and the function of the penal system. Unlike the traditional offender, who violated a norm and received a proportional sanction, the enemy of the state was someone whose mere existence represented a risk to the political order. Their persecution did not depend on a specific act, but rather on their identity, origin, beliefs, or behavior interpreted as hostile to the regime. The law ceased to be a tool of balance and became an instrument of preventive elimination. This doctrine was applied especially against Jews, communists, Roma, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and anyone considered unreformable or dangerous because of their ideology or their nature. The enemy had no rights, did not deserve a fair trial, no defense, and no presumption of innocence. They were treated as a permanent threat that had to be contained or eliminated. In the concentration camps, this vision reached its most extreme application. Those classified as enemies of the state were imprisoned without trial, subjected to forced labor, torture, or outright extermination. The category was broad enough to include everything from political opponents to artists, writers, religious figures, or anyone singled out for racial reasons. The Nazi legal system adapted to this logic. Laws were reformed to allow for indefinite detention, confiscation of property, loss of citizenship, and execution without trial. In many cases, the definition of an enemy didn't even require evidence. Suspicion, denunciation, or affiliation were sufficient. Jurists such as Carl Schmitt were key in the theoretical construction of this idea. They argued that sovereignty implied the power to decide who was friend or enemy, and that the state should reserve the right to act against anyone who questioned its existence. In this way, Nazi criminal law was transformed into a political law, focused on the defense of the state rather than the protection of the individual. The doctrine was not limited to the courts. It permeated all levels of administration, the police, the press, education, and culture. It became a narrative of internal war. It was not about punishing behavior, but about eradicating human groups considered incompatible with the new order. As the war progressed, this logic hardened. The enemy of the state was associated with the racial enemy, the enemy of the people, the internal traitor. The purges intensified, the categories expanded, repression became massive and unchecked. Legality, in the strict sense, disappeared. After 1945, this doctrine was identified by the Allies as one of the ideological pillars of Nazism. During the Nuremberg trials, it was highlighted how this legal construct allowed the systematic murder of millions of people under the guise of legality. This was not an isolated excess, but a state policy supported by laws, judges, and rationalized discourse. Today, the idea of the enemy of the state under the Nazi model is considered one of the most dangerous aberrations of modern law. It serves as an example of how a normative system can be manipulated to justify annihilation. This was not a failure of law, but rather its deliberate use for totalitarian purposes. Forced sterilization. At the core of the Nazi regime's biological policy was a system designed to control reproduction based on the imposed idea of preserving the genetic purity of the German people. To this end, the law for the prevention of offspring with hereditary diseases was enacted in July 1933. This provision authorized state-selected doctors to perform surgical procedures on people with diagnoses considered transmissible. Among the conditions targeted were schizophrenia, epilepsy, congenital deafness, hereditary blindness, developmental disorders, persistent alcohol consumption, and severe physical malformations. The measure was presented as a health measure, although it was part of a population selection scheme backed by official bodies and supported by influential sectors of the medical community. Decisions were concentrated in the hereditary health tribunals created to validate each intervention. These tribunals operated without due process. A doctor's report or a complaint was sufficient to initiate the procedure. Hearings were brief, and rulings favorable to the procedure were the norm. The complaints presented had minimal effect. During the first 2 years of implementation, more than 60,000 interventions were performed. By 1939, the total exceeded 300,000. Most of those affected came from marginalized backgrounds: institutionalized patients, people living in poverty, single women considered unstable, and people with disabilities. The methods used were invasive. Obstructive procedures were performed on men, and techniques involving cutting or the removal of internal organs were used on women. Many of these practices were carried out under precarious conditions, causing infections, irreversible damage, or severe consequences. Minors considered unfit for reproduction were also included. In some cases, emotional pressure was used on family members to obtain formal consent. However, most decisions were made directly without the possibility of effective opposition. Official propaganda presented the measure as a preventative policy. It was claimed that each case strengthened the social whole. Under this logic, medicine was subordinated to ideological criteria that excluded those who did not fit the functional model proposed by the regime. This framework was maintained until the collapse of the Third Reich. All procedures were recorded in detailed archives generated by the courts themselves. The model was promoted as an organized public policy, endorsed and executed by professionals from different sectors. After the war, the Allied authorities brought these practices before international bodies. Documents, testimonies, and records were exhibited in Nuremberg that demonstrated the systematic structure of the program. Some professionals directly involved were tried and convicted. Others resumed their careers without consequences. Today, these events are studied as an example of how applied science under an authoritarian regime can be transformed into a tool of social control. This strategy was conceived, planned, and carried out with institutional support, revealing how knowledge can be adapted for exclusionary purposes. The Action T4 program. At the end of 1938, a Leipzig family handed their son, who was in serious physical condition, over to the Reich health authorities. The case was escalated to Hitler, who approved a terminal intervention under the concept of medical compassion. This authorization initiated a completely covert state operation, Action T4. The program's name came from the address where its main headquarters operated in Berlin, Tiergartenstraße 4. From this location, a strategy was coordinated to eliminate those considered to be functionally worthless. The stated purpose was to reduce the economic burden posed by individuals with physical disabilities, mental illness, or chronic conditions. In early 1939, the government distributed official forms to hospitals, psychiatric centers, and nursing homes. The documents requested information on patients with cognitive impairment, hereditary conditions, or prolonged dependency. The records were reviewed by doctors assigned by the regime, who decided the fate of each case without the need for direct contact or in-person evaluations. Selected individuals were transferred to facilities specially adapted for final procedures. Some of the main centers were Hadamar, Hartheim, Grafeneck, Sonnenstein, Bernburg, and Brandenburg. These facilities applied lethal methods in spaces designed to resemble communal showers. This approach was a direct precursor to the systems later employed in the East. After the procedures, official certificates were altered. Relatives were notified of a general clinical cause accompanied by an urn containing remains and a letter written in technical and neutral language. Every part of the process was designed to conceal the actual stages of the operation. Between 1939 and 1941, the Action T4 program led to the forced termination of more than 70,000 individuals. although its formal cancellation was announced in August 1941 following some internal objections, including those of Bishop Clemens August von Galen. The procedures continued covertly through other techniques such as extreme doses, dietary suppression, and planned medical omission. The personnel involved in Action T4 were subsequently assigned to other regions of the Reich. Many of its members participated in the construction and management of mass elimination facilities. The operation served as a technical and organizational test for applying this model in larger scenarios. The teams replicated the protocol learned in T4 with improved efficiency on a larger scale. At the end of the conflict, those responsible were included in the judicial proceedings organized by the Allied powers. Some of the material presented at Nuremberg included medical records, transfers, administrative decisions, and concealment techniques applied during the operation. Some were sentenced. Others, however, returned to their professional roles without legal consequences. Action T4 is currently being studied as the first fully structured state plan for elimination based on medical criteria. Its implementation marked the shift from policies of social exclusion to strategies of physical suppression organized from the healthcare sector. The program revealed the extent to which the regime's clinical apparatus could be aligned with its purification objectives. Medical experiments in concentration camps. During the Nazi regime, several detention centers were used as sites for medical testing without the authorization of the individuals selected. Thousands of detainees, mostly Jews, Roma, and captured soldiers, were chosen to participate in studies conducted by professionals serving the Reich. These tests, endorsed by central authorities, were oriented toward military or racial interests, or based on pseudo-scientific theories. At Auschwitz, Dr. Josef Mengele coordinated procedures performed on identical twins. Substances were applied to the eyes to alter the color of the iris, surgeries were performed without anesthesia, and comparative analyses were conducted after extreme procedures were applied to one of the siblings. His work was justified as part of genetic research focused on biological inheritance. At Dachau, studies sought to measure physical endurance in extreme situations. Several detainees were exposed to reduced pressure to simulate high altitudes or were placed in cold environments to evaluate recovery techniques. Many of the participants were unable to resist the effects of these practices. Another set of tests aimed to evaluate the effectiveness of medications against serious infections. At Buchenwald and Sachsenhausen, inmates were exposed to typhus, tuberculosis, or hepatitis and subsequently received experimental formulas. A large proportion of the individuals subjected to these studies failed to survive the process. Women were also included in these trials. At Ravensbrück, several underwent surgery without anesthesia. Some received bacteria in open wounds, others were subjected to induced fractures as part of trauma trials. Reproductive suppression methods using radiation, chemical compounds, or aggressive surgeries were also employed. All of these responded to projects related to the theories of biological enhancement promoted by the regime. The doctors in charge of these procedures presented them as science in the service of the state. According to their interpretation, the selected individuals did not contribute to the strengthening of the national body and, therefore, could be used in studies without ethical restrictions. At the end of the war, these events were documented in the judicial proceedings known as the Doctors' Trial, held in Nuremberg. 23 health professionals were charged for participating in these actions. 12 received maximum sentences or early releases ordered by the court. As a direct response to what happened, the Nuremberg Code was created in 1947, a set of principles that still governs ethics in medical research involving human subjects. Despite the collection of files, images, and technical reports, several of those responsible managed to avoid legal proceedings and resumed their activities in other countries. The impact of these practices remains a reference for analyzing the limits that science must have when under authoritarian structures. The structures, emblems, and institutional programs promoted by the Nazi regime generated a profound transformation in the history of the 20th century. They were concrete devices applied with precision to exclude, dominate, and eradicate. Their presence remains in current archives, studies, and regulations as a reminder of the real effects they had. For this reason, many of these creations were suppressed, dissolved, or legally classified, not because of what they symbolized, but because of the structural damage they caused. Understanding their design allows us to identify the mechanisms of totalitarian power. Their continued existence as a subject of study serves an essential function: to warn of the barriers that no society can ever cross again.